Labas rytas, gerbėmieji kolegos.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Speaker of the Seimas, the ruling on the extraordinary session of the Seimas, according to the statute of the Seimas and its Article 88, and based on the proposal of 49 members of the Seimas, we are convening the plenary sitting of the extraordinary session. On the 18th of August 2020, we start the extraordinary session of the Seimas. Colleagues, based on Article 165 of the statute, I have to announce that the President of the Republic of Lithuania, by his decree, returns the draft laws on the security assurance and the protection of security objects and amendments of appropriate articles for repeat consideration at the Seimas. There is the second decree that the fishery law is being returned for consideration by the Seimas. Now the adoption of the agenda. Colleagues, you know that by the initiative, we have the agenda of this extraordinary session. Do we agree? Yes, we agree by consensus. Colleagues, I want to remind you that the Latvian Parliament is also convening an extraordinary session. Please register for the sitting.
Užsiregistravo
117 members of the Seimas have registered. The first point of the agenda, by the decision of the Seimas on the program of the extraordinary session of the Seimas. I give the floor to Irena Degutienė to present the program. Colleagues, guests of the sitting. We are opening an extraordinary session of the Seimas, initiated by more than one-third of members of the Seimas, from the Conservative Party, Liberals Union Party, Lithuanian Social Democrats Party, and non-affiliated members. We initiated this session in the framework of the falsified results of the presidential elections in Belarus and the current human rights situation in this country. This situation in the neighboring country is changing every hour. Belarusians and other noble nations of the country have claimed their right to honor freedom and democracy. This is not only a mere fight, this is a necessary defense against this violent dictator and his protectors, and also shameful rhetoric. It is also a necessary defense in the face of history. This is the issue of our honor to be together with those people who are willing to live free in democracy. 30 years ago, we experienced the 13th of January. We survived falsehood, hours of waiting, and every news that came to us from the democratic world that supported us and gave us courage was very valuable. Today, the Belarusian nation is experiencing that. Therefore, with our historical brothers and sisters, we need to stand together for the sake of the respect to human beings, the state, and democracy. Today, the Latvian parliament has also convened to the extraordinary session. We have presented two issues for the agenda. First is the debate following the falsified results of the presidential election in Belarus and Belarusian expectations towards the international community. We will listen to the presentations by representatives of civil society and opposition on the opposition in Belarus. And point two is the resolution of the Seimas on the situation in the Republic of Belarus after the falsified presidential election. In this resolution, we stress our position on the illegitimacy of the presidential status of Alexander Lukashenko, and we will invite other European countries to introduce sanctions against certain Belarusian officials. Our values are based on the test of time, and therefore I hope and I am proud of our ability to agree and to come together for the benefit of democracy and freedom, because this is about democracy, about Europe, about each and every one of us. Therefore, I invite you to adopt the program of the extraordinary session of the Seimas. I thank Mrs. Degutienė. There were no questions. Now, do we have any motives? Do we agree? Do we adopt the agenda by consensus? Yes. Consideration? No speakers registered for that. So, do we adopt that? Do we have any motives in the adoption? Now, dear colleagues, let us vote for the adoption of the program of the extraordinary session of the Seimas.
Balsavo
118 members of the Seimas voted to agree on the adoption of the program of session of the Seimas. Now, 1.3 discussion or debate following the falsified results of the presidential election in Belarus. Belarusian civil society's expectations towards the international community. Ladies and gentlemen, the Speaker of the Seimas would like to remotely give his welcome address before the debate. The floor is yours. Viktoras Pranckietis, Speaker of the Seimas. Thank you. Colleagues, members of the Seimas, people of Lithuania and Belarus, I welcome you to the extraordinary session of the Seimas in order to evaluate the situation in the Republic of Belarus and to congratulate you on the beginning of the restoration of democracy in Belarus. Now we are convening here in the Seimas not only to represent the Belarusian nation, but also to defend our brothers and sisters in Belarus who are fighting for democracy and freedom in their country. This is a peaceful struggle, but it is clashed confronted with violence. I wanted to be together with you, but since I participated in the Warsaw meeting, I had to isolate myself. I abide by the rules and I will set the test for COVID and I will return to the Seimas. Today's discussion in the hall of the Seimas will also be discussed in the Latvian Seima. We discussed on the positions with the Latvian speaker on that. Last Friday, the Latvian Seima adopted its resolution. On Saturday, with the Marshal of the Polish Sejm, we discussed the possibilities of further cooperation. International media and international organizations stresses that Lithuania has the right to bravely represent the interests of the Belarusian nation. We are speaking with one voice, and we are seeking the widest possible international partners coalition. Now we stress the truth about the Belarusian elections. We request the responsibility of those who deceived the Belarusian nation. This will be the beginning in seeking the actions by the wider international community. Today, the Belarusian democratic movement is becoming united. I invite you all to observe and follow this sitting. I hope and I believe in the success of the beginning of the freedom revival in Belarus. Now I thank the Speaker of the Seimas and I give the floor to Mr. Anatoly Lebedko, former chairman of the United Civic Party of Belarus.
Minutėlę, tuoj deriname sujungimą nuotoliniu būdu. Taip, gerbiami kolegos, kadangi
Colleagues, since we have some technical issues, I would like to give the floor to Vladimir Neklayev, the coordinator of the Belarusian National Congress.
Меня чувать? Видать, нет?
Can you hear me and can you see me? Yes, we do. Well, first of all, let me thank you for the possibility to address the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania today. And through the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania to the European Parliament and parliaments of the member countries of the European Union. We know that many of our neighbors, Lithuanians, today speak Russian better than English. Let me just speak in English today. Our country, with 10 million population, is not a Latin American country. We are in Europe, and it is more than a quarter of the century that we have been suffering by a dictatorship of Alexander Lukashenko in our country, just like it is the situation with dictatorship in some Latin American countries. But we are here next to you, and at the same time we see how Europe is playing with him. Each election in Belarus are not fair. During the last elections, I was beaten up. It was in 2010 when I was running for the president's elections as well. In reality, Europe has recognized these elections because sanctions were abolished, the dialogue with the dictator was started, and this dialogue, so to say, led to the fact that the opposition was eliminated because the politics of assistance was acknowledged as more appropriate. And this is how today we have found ourselves in this nightmare. People who were torturing their countrymen were accepted in Europe. The force structures were said to be colleagues in Europe. This is how today we see the flourishing Lukashenko regime. I think this is a shame for Europe, among other things. When I was in KGB prison 10 years ago, and in the European Parliament, my daughter made a speech, who is not a politician at all, she is working in the field of culture. She said the following: the keys to the door of the prison where my father is in prison today is on your table. And when recalling her words today, I can say that the key for the prison door where our freedom, Belarusian freedom, is imprisoned is on our table. It will be easier for us, though, if you will help us to pull it. In conclusion, I would like to say the following. The issue of freedom is not just the issue of Belarus. After the Second World War, after the march of the democracy, people turned back to fascism. and non-democracy, which is a very big threat today. We can't wait until a new tragedy strikes. The victory or the loss in Belarus will be a deciding factor how we are going to live in the future. Lithuania, Poland, and the whole of Europe. Our future is one because we are very closely united. I look at you with a great deal of hope, and I do believe that in the future we are going to be united till the very end, to conquer the dictatorship. We have been together, and I believe we will stay together. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Neklayev, the coordinator of the Belarusian National Congress. Now, as far as I know, Anatoly Lebedska is able to connect, and he will be speaking. He was the former chairman of the United Civic Party of Belarus. So the floor is yours, sir.
Good morning.
Большая честь сейчас выступать перед депутатами Сейма Литвы. Я хотел начать свое выступление с одного слова.
I would like to start from one word. Thank you. Thank you to each of you, every Lithuanian person who has expressed his or her support to Belarus, who have gone to the streets in solidarity with our country, who have posted in social media. And let me start today by saying that we are honoring two national heroes by a minute of silence today, those who are not with us any longer, who have been killed by Alexander Lukashenko regime. Thank you. The political agenda of Belarus is formed. The former president of Belarus, Lukashenko, has to resign. Second, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who has been elected by most Belarusian people, has to lead the country and resolve the issue of fair and free elections for the president and bring the country back to the constitution of 1994. Today we have the 10th day of protests already. The statistics is sad because we lost 2 people. Some speak about higher numbers of victims. 7 people are struggling to live further. 76 are imprisoned, even though we had as many as 7,500 detained people. 80 people are facing criminal charges, and they are facing the threat of long imprisonment sentences for resisting the brutal force. When people ask, what can you do, the Belarusian authorities today? Is the negotiation possible? Yes, it is possible. However, it is only when all the detained people, all the political prisoners are released. The second, the agenda of the negotiations can be just as follows: to peacefully transfer the power to the new leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And the third condition is that the negotiations are possible only with the mediating by such international organizations as OSCE and other. Sometimes we hear the question, what can we expect from the international community today? First of all, we expect recognition of non-legitimacy of Alexander Lukashenko. Second, comprehensive support to civic society of Belarus, all the citizens who are repressed today. Also, introduction of sanctions to all who have been organizing the elections, who have contributed to falsifying the results, who allowed the use of force. And I believe that Lithuania could also use some instruments here, like law of Magnitsky. 4. To mediate in the negotiations over peaceful transfer of power in Belarus. We expect a very clear message from the international community to Moscow. Moscow has to respect the choice of Belarusian people. 6. We are supporting the initiative of Andrius Kubilius, member of the European Parliament, regarding the investigation of Belarusian OMON structures. We can even speak about some kind of tribunal to investigate the crimes of Alexander Lukashenko, which is necessary in moral point of view. And in conclusion, I could also add that the year 2010, which we remember very well, was a happy year to me because I have been in opposition for 30 years now already. I was in opposition 30 years ago. I was in Ukrainian Maidan, and it was then that I said, I pray to live to the day when the same amount of people come to the streets of Belarus. And I am happy to see that today. This is our time. We cannot let this opportunity go. It is only possible if we live in solidarity, if we hear your voice. So once again, let me thank you once again for all your efforts, because we have noticed that smile is very typical of Belarusian people, and it makes everyone happy. Belarusian people are so united today, all for one and one for all. Thank you for organizing this session. Belarus also has the so-called parliament, however, it's just a part of the administration of the Belarusian country. We are so grateful for the efforts of our neighbors, the countries that have genuine parliaments. Long live Belarus, long live Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. Lebedska, for your words. Olga Krach is the next speaker. She is the head of our home human rights organization of Belarus.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут Ольга Карач.
Hello, I'm Olga Karach. I'm from Belarus. In Belarus is facing huge repressions and violence. There's a huge number of people, 98 people are missing now. Yesterday, doctors from Belarus marched to the streets with the requirements. They demanded the permission to examine the injured people, and also they demanded the resignation of the minister. In Belarusian prisons, people are being violated, abused, women are being abused, but also those forces also torture children, and those facts have been proven. Today, children of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya are in Lithuania. Lithuania is hiding the children of Tikhanovskaya because they can be kidnapped by the security forces of Belarus. My children too are in Lithuania. In January 2014, Lukashenko's forces wanted to abduct my son Svetoslav, who was 1 month. I was put before the choice whether I work for the KGB or I stop any human rights activity. I selected to flee together with my son. It was not easy. I had 1 hour to take the decision in January 2014. It was the most terrible night in my life. Lithuania has become the second homeland for my children. Thank you, the Lithuanian people, the Lithuanian government, because you proved that Belarusian children for you are not foreigners. And now you see the picture. And this is a 5-year-old girl in Grodno who was injured. She was beaten by the forces of Lukashenko because her mother pressed the horn in solidarity with the protesters. This girl is 5 years old and she's in a difficult situation now. And my daughter is 5 years old too. I always knew that children cannot take part in politics. I wanted my children to lead a very normal life, but unfortunately today my children cannot also stand aside. And they came to the Seimas here to ask on behalf of all the children in Belarus who have been injured and abused by the Lukashenko's forces. It is not me, but my children who are asking you to save Belarus. Today, they have brought a very symbolic toy for the Seimas. This is a Belarusian toy, an ancient Belarusian symbol. This is a pony. This is a token of appreciation for showing consideration to Belarus by the Lithuanian Seimas. Thank you.
1863 году в восстании косовиков-кассинеров
In 1863, during the uprising,
их убивали
our nations joined together. They
измученный белорусский народ.
stood together. And actually, the Belarusian nation stands together today. And
Костася Калиновского, борца за нашу и вашу свободу,
I thank the
где в общей яме
Lithuanian state
и закопали убийц.
for burying the remains of Konstantin Kalinovsky's remains.
Прав Костася Калиновского в Беларуси началось массовое
At that time, a massive
освободительный протест.
protests began in Belarus against the integration of Belarus with Russia.
Символично,
And for me, it is very symbolic
эти два процесса
that those two processes were parallel. This was our symbolic march, and Konstantin Kalinovsky is our joint hero.
Метрополиса и белорусских магазинов, а через посещение мемориала Костасю Калиновскому
Belarusians actually pay tribute to our joint history not by shopping in Acropolis, but by visiting the monument to our joint heroes.
право и самоуправление.
Lithuanians and Belarusians had the Magdeburg rights.
Лукашенко.
Alexander Lukashenko destroyed that.
Александр Лукашенко
With the emergence of Lukashenko,
потерял право голоса и право требовать
rulelessness began in Belarus. Today, we start the new fight for Belarus.
отцовские белорусские скачут вместе.
And I'm very glad that two knights of Lithuania and Belarus fight hand in hand today.
Сигнатарь независимости
Emanuel
Эммануэль Зингерис
Zingeris,
сказал для меня очень важные слова.
a signatory to the Act of Lithuania's independence, said that
Общие символы и литовцы
we have joint symbols in Belarus and in Lithuania.
европейские ценности
We have joint and common values.
скачут вместе за нас,
Because the two knights that are the symbols of our nations
чтобы
fight together
играли спокойно,
for the freedom of our two countries and for the freedom of our children, so that they are not being tortured for any reason.
которого зовут так же, как и моего сына, это инокиня и просветительница периода Полоцкого княжества. Ефросинья Полоцкая много занималась просветительством белорусского народа.
Efrosinia Polotskaya, the Belarusian saint, did a lot,
Уничтожал белорусскую культуру, уничтожал
but Alexander Lukashenko destroyed this culture, destroyed this heritage. We have a 1,000-year history in our country. Our history started well before Lukashenko and will continue after him. Lukashenko is trying to erase our long-term history and culture. Last year, Lukashenko ordered
сотрудниками НКВД КГБ.
to destroy the crosses at the sites of Stalin's repressions.
Белорусских журналистов стреляют.
And today people are being killed because of repressions. The journalists are being shooted at, the grenades are being thrown at people.
Силовики выбивают
And unfortunately, the power forces
3 августа 1989 года
destroy the crosses, and they destroy the willingness to freedom of the Belarusian people. Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians joined their hands in the Baltic Way for freedom. Today, they join their hands with Belarusians for their freedom. Lithuanians stood at the television tower in 1991. You remember those times, and you remember when you achieved your independence, and we will not retreat until we achieve the same. This year, the Lithuanian parliament marks its 100th anniversary. It was first led by a woman. The first
восстановления своей независимости.
publications in Lithuania were in not only in the Lithuanian but also in the Belarusian language.
И я хочу пригласить вас всех принять участие в праздновании независимости нашей
I want
30-летней
you
независимости
to invite you to join the 30th anniversary of our independence, and I hope that we will be able to celebrate it without Lukashenko. I also want to say that Lukashenko
своим безответственным решением строить атомную станцию
threatens not only the independence of Belarus
протестов понятно, что добавочный блок на второй
by his decision to construct the nuclear power plant in Ostrovets. He actually threatened not only our country and its security, but also other countries and your country as well. We need to ensure free and safe Vilnius, green Vilnius.
до сих пор уверен, что Франциск Скорина
Francis Skorina is our joint hero who published his books in Vilnius. Though Lukashenko claims that he did it in St. Petersburg.
Вильнюсовской гимназии и потом уехал.
My grandfather also studied in Vilnius. Then he went to Volkovysk to work as a teacher.
И он не изменил белорусов и не изменил наше стремление к свободе.
History changed the lives of Lithuanians and Belarusians, but it did not change our values. We are starting to reestablish our state and its freedom.
Мирной. Но действия
Unfortunately,
Александра Лукашенко нельзя назвать мирными.
the blood is shed by
Беларусь
peaceful protesters in Belarus. These protests in Belarus cannot be called only peaceful. Lukashenko has been killing people for 26 years for political reasons.
похищенных людях Беларуси. И мы должны закончить эту работу и найти всех
Member of the European Parliament also spoke about that. We have to find all missing people. We have
6 человек, которых мы всей страной ищем сегодня. Преступление
96 people missing in Belarus.
и он должен передать свои полномочия.
The crimes of Lukashenko's regimes need to be investigated. Mr. Lukashenko has to step down and to pass over his powers to the next president. Thank you very much for what you are doing for us once again, for our freedom and yours.
Žmogaus teisų apsaugos organizacijos, mūsų namai vadovai,
Thank you very much
mamai, kurios šaunūs vaikai ką tik buvo prieš mus,
for Olga Karach. The flowers are for you.
posėdėje dalyvauja Olgos mama.
We have Olga's mother here in the Seimas, Svetlana Karach. Thank you for being here with us.
Gerbėmiai kolegos, su mumis kartu yra ir Pavelas
Colleagues,
Marinis.
today we have Pavel Koryt,
Projekto Zubr vadovas.
the head of election monitoring project Zubr in Belarus. The floor is yours, Pavel Marinic. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you for having convened here in this sitting chamber today, for the fact that you are closely following the situation in Belarus. Let me briefly tell you about how we have created an alternative platform to count the votes. The aim of platform Zubr is to process all the votes cast. And our hope was that with this project we will help each Belarusian person to realize its power. In the preliminary elections, as well as on the main day of elections, the platform Zubr was gathering all the messages, all the pieces of information about from people. We are collecting data from all the observers, organization of human rights protection, civic organizations and campaigns. And during this period, we have gathered 6,000 notifications about alleged violations. The total number of constituencies, poll stations in Belarus is 5,700. From the notifications we have got, we realized that we had unprecedented incidents and fraud. And the sad result is that we didn't see elections because the independent observers were pulled out of the polling stations. They were taken by militia, and the eyewitnesses are saying they were not shown what the authorities are supposed to show based on the law. And the decision not to allow the observers to do what they are supposed to do is a crime. Nevertheless, the observers still did what they intended. We arranged it in such a way that every citizen had an opportunity to make pictures and fix all the violations. The number of violations is really vast. Our platform was working for the week, and the result is as follows. Belarusians were not allowed to observe the elections. I have a lot of figures given by our platform, but I believe today we should speak about a different thing. When the platform Zubr was disconnected on the 9th of August, we received the data from alternative sources about the violations, about the falsification. And even today, we still are receiving the protocols that people were not able to send on the day of the elections. Our platform is working just aiming at transparency of elections. The prosecutor's office, though, does not investigate into the fact of the violation. Rather, the opposite. We are threatened with criminal charges, and the evidence that we have is going to be used as the evidence material. The basis of our platform comprises 65,000 people. I'm not trying to say that all the members of the election commission were fraudulent. However, everyone who has participated in the fraud has to bear the responsibility. For the whole week, we have been showing programs on TV, showing what's going on in our polling stations. Members of the parliament also were invited into the programs, and they spoke a lot about Lithuania acting as the initiator of the process by using Magnitsky list, which is a very important activity, because what was going on the streets of the Belarusian cities is evidence of the crime, including the crimes of the election commission members. People flooded the streets in towns and cities trying to say that Lukashenko is not their president anymore. And we can state with greatest responsibility that the Belarusian nation has chosen Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as their president. Our platform Zubr is going to carry on collecting the evidence basis. We are going to publicize the names of everyone who is participating in the crimes today. Long live Belarus.
I thank Mr. Marinic. Now I would like to give the floor to Pavel Liberal, head of the unfalsified polling project Voice. He will join us online. So, Pavel, the floor is yours. 1 minute, we cannot. Do you hear me now? Yes, we do. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. I established the platform on Voice as a digital control of the election. This platform was established in order to be an alternative for counting the votes. We asked our citizens who voted for candidates to take pictures of their ballot papers and to send us those photos. We did this because many people in our country do not trust our electoral commission. Their ballot papers become missing. The ballot papers are not counted. I will not be emotional now. I will be speaking about data. The two platforms, Zubr and Voice, helped us to count the majority of the votes of the voters. 1 million voters gave us their data, and with this data we can already state, based not on emotions but on facts, that Alexander Lukashenko cannot be considered a legitimate president now and today, because according to the final documents he did not collect 62%. In every third polling stations, differences were found between the ballot papers and the photographs we were sent. In every third polling stations, the results were falsified. We have protocols of the protocols and ballot papers, and every citizen can see that, can count the votes, and this can be done transparently, so we can clearly see the falsification, and therefore we cannot speak about any unbiased election. Concerning Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, interesting results were received. We have 5,062 polling stations, and we saw that according to the official data, 70% of all the votes cast were for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. The analysis of the simple data photographs and the votes, the voter turnout numbers, clearly show that we cannot consider that the election in Belarus was appropriate or in line with the data that was published by the Central Electoral Commission. In the current situation in Belarus, well, thanks to the platforms such as Zuber and Voice, we can control the elections, and people who see that ballot papers are being photographed, the majority of such polling stations were forced to count the ballots transparently. Later on, they were falsified in some polling stations. Our platforms help the civil society to develop further, to be more conscious. We will continue our activity and we will present our data to the Supreme Court. I thank Mr. Liber. Colleagues, we used to have the rules of the possibility to ask questions and to forward them to the presenters. We have some people willing to ask questions. Mr. Gediminas Kirkilas. Colleagues, it will be very difficult to ask those questions and then to unite all the speakers. Therefore, I propose to finish this part of the sitting and move to the consideration and adoption of the resolution where we can debate on the text. Now, colleagues, can we finish this part and this point on the agenda and move to the other point of the agenda? We will devote more time for the discussion. We agreed to that by consensus. Now, next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft resolution of the Seimas on the situation in the Republic of Belarus following the falsified presidential election. Now I give the floor to Mr. Žygimantas Pavilionis, the initiator of the resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know the text of this resolution. Let me remind you several essential principles. In this resolution, first of all, we support the decision of the Belarusian nation. We do not recognize the results of the presidential election of the 9th of August 2020. We do not consider Alexander Lukashenko a legitimate leader of the state. We demand new, free, and transparent elections according to international requirements. We propose our mediation mission, and we propose the introduction of individual sanctions against those people who were involved in the falsification of the presidential election results. We also address the European Parliament, the European Union to introduce sanctions. We ask for support to the Belarusian NGOs, giving assistance and asylum to those NGOs, and to curb the support to state institutions of Belarus. And we invite the public discussion on the situation in the Republic of Belarus and introduce the embargo on the electricity produced by the Belarusian MPP. In the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Seimas, we adopted those principles, and we will adopt those principles by the entire Seimas, and we will address the parliaments of the European Union and NATO countries, the European Parliament, heads of the European Parliament, the European Commission, Latvian, Polish, Ukrainian parliaments are following suit. only our leadership is important. Not only our leadership is important today, our unity is the most important. Both by drafting this resolution and by convening to this session and by acting in unison to collect our efforts and to support Belarus in its fight for democracy, human rights, and human dignity. Therefore, I would like to ask you to forget all our differences and to adopt this resolution by consensus so that the Belarusian nation and the entire democratic world sees this support as a strong spirit so that we stand together for your and our freedom. Thank you. Now some questions. Aušrinė Armonaitė.
Thank you. Let me express my sympathy to all the people who are on the streets in Belarus today. However, those who are organizing the violence, acts of violence, should not be glad enjoying the freedom of Europe. They should be prevented from coming here or other European countries or enjoying the freedom to keep their funds in European banks. Do you think the European Council will be courageous enough to adopt the unified sanctions to the Belarusian regime and to show that the respect to one's human rights and freedoms is the biggest value, European value? Well, I'm not sure if the will be strongly united. However, what I know is that we need to show our solidarity and initiative. I know that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already is putting together a list of individuals you mentioned, and we should show the example to everyone else. The European Magnitsky law banning sanctions against economic activities of those people in our countries is in place, and therefore I believe that our leaders should encourage the European Union to adopt this global Magnitsky Act so that together with the UK and the United States of America we could be united and impose the sanctions. It goes without saying that I'm going to agree with this resolution, and I would like to urge all of you to adopt it unanimously. However, my question is as follows. Maybe our measures should be stricter, because the experience shows that individual sanctions are not working very strongly. Of course, we need to put together this list of individuals. However, many of those people may not be willing to travel to European countries altogether or develop some commercial activities overseas. For instance, if we look back at the Soviet Union era, which was the empire of evil, the question arises, maybe we should undertake something more than that. Well, actually, we speak not only about individual sanctions, but also limitation of all the commercial activities, financial activities for the people, including on the list. I believe that in exchange to democratic changes, democratic elections, we could then propose warming up the relations and offer a number of measures that Ukraine is enjoying today. However, the dictator must resign. Vytautas Bakas. Thank you. Yes, indeed, I welcome the initiative that we are sort of showing the way for the international community who is looking for the best possible solutions. And I believe that this resolution confirms once again that Lithuania is an expert in East Europe, on Eastern European matters. However, the information that we heard today about the missing people, big amounts of people who cannot be found, we remember that the regime was killing its opponents, and these crimes have remained uncovered. Don't you think that this resolution should also reflect the urge to investigate the crimes committed? Because if Lukashenko is a criminal, we need to state that. It's not just a former president, because when we hear to what's happening in Belarus, he is a criminal. Well, in our resolution, we speak about the main principle. Everyone who has falsified the elections and who have contributed to the crimes against human rights and freedoms, everyone should be included in the list. It's a principle, in fact, while consulting with other governments and parliaments of other democratic states, all the crimes will need to be investigated, of course. But however, we are not an executive power here today. Even though I believe that all the crimes have to be investigated, today we are just showing the way, showing the direction, and I believe that the government will undertake the implementation and investigation of the crime. Rimantas Degis. I don't think anyone has any doubts regarding the necessity to adopt the resolution. However, as a part of the European Union, Lithuania has its own responsibilities and its own possibilities, just as our neighbors. Don't you think that the time has come to form a clear strategy and approach in the European Union about events in Belarus? Because we cannot stay vague. We have to send a clear message to Belarus what future holds for them. European Union cannot say that we are going to observe and talk about some violations. They must have a clear vision. If we remember, when Lithuania was getting its freedom back, we were in a similar situation. Well, yes, indeed, many countries have raised the issue of non-democratic regime. However, many of them were still willing to develop the further relations despite of the internal conflicts in the country. I believe that European Union has to open its doors wide only to democratic
Tai, kad
Belarus.
visa Europos Sąjunga, aš tikiuosi, ir
So
užsienio reikalų ministrų ir mūsų
our
prezidentų
aspiration
pasieks,
is
kad visa Europos
that
Sąjunga
the
vienu
whole
balsu,
European Union is
paragins,
strongly
surengti
unified
naujus rinkimus
in urging
ir
Belarus to
demokratinei
hold new
Baltarusijai
fair
išties tą
elections
ranką. Aš manau, tai būtų
and will
teisinga.
stretch its
Anksčiau tokios
hand of
sąlygos
assistance
nebuvo
to
iki šių
the
įvykių
new
ir aš manau,
democratic
kad,
Belarus,
rytoj vykstančiame
which
viršūnių
never happened
susitikime
before.
mūsų
And I believe that
vadovams
tomorrow
reikia
during the summit, our leaders will manage to agree on that.
Ačiū pirmininkė.
Algirdas
Pirmiausia,
Sysas.
noriu padėkoti visiems kolegom ir
Thank you.
Seimo
First of all, I would like to
pirmininkui
thank all of my
už tai, kad
colleagues
atsiliepė į
and
mūsų
Speaker of the Parliament
socdemų
for
idėją surengti eilinį
responding
posėdį ir
to the initiative of Social Democrats to hold this extraordinary session, and I do believe that today we are here to really help Belarus and Belarusian people. What I lack in the resolution is any reference to the independent trade unions, because it was mainly their initiative as it comes to the strikes and protests. Would you agree that in point 6 we could also add independent trade unions? Because a lot depends on their further activities in Belarus. Thank you. Well, indeed, I would like to just to note that it was not only the Social Democrats, but also other political factions that were urging to organize this extraordinary session here today. And I would like to propose to leave the wording, the text of the resolution as it is today, because when speaking about NGOs and communities, we actually have a very wide conception in mind. And here we are focusing rather on principles, on the consensus between the parties. The text was thoroughly prepared, discussed in various committees, political factions. It has been coordinated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I would be grateful if we don't change the wording. Rasa Budbergytė, it goes without saying that in the face of the political crisis, de-escalation is of key importance. Can you please say which side we want to support so that it is not seen as if one individual country tries to interfere into the internal matters? What strategy do you think is the best in this situation? Well, I do agree with our main goal, and I believe that in the summit we will adopt a unified opinion. I have a long political experience and diplomatic experience, and I believe that the neighboring countries, in this situation, Lithuania is the one that can take the lead by proclaiming Lukashenko an illegitimate leader, offering assistance to NGOs. We will be showing leadership. The Polish government is also allocating significant amounts to support NGOs. Lithuania cannot offer the same level of assistance. However, I believe that what we have to do is to wake other countries' leaders up. I know that the president is also talking to other presidents and leaders of the countries. Let's say the leaders of Christian Democrats from Germany are in Lithuania today. This is the time of our leadership, which we have to demonstrate. If we don't really show leadership, we cannot really hope for the best results. Colleagues, the time for our questions is up. but I see 6 or 7 colleagues that are still willing to ask. Do you think we should stop here? We will have more time for discussions then. Thank you.
Colleagues, okay, now let us start the debate. I give the floor to Linas Linkevičius, Minister of Foreign Affairs, to start the debate. Colleagues, we have convened here in this important hall to present a very important message, both for the Belarusian people, both for the international community and international organizations, not only about what is happening in the neighboring country, but also about the crimes that the world community has witnessed. And this behavior on the part of the former leader of this country, who is actually eager to stay in power, has to be clearly defined. Therefore, we need to prepare the sanctions, including national sanctions. We have done that already. This is one of the measures for exerting pressure. We also need to assist people by establishing a fund for treating the injured people. Only by proactive methods we can influence the situation. We have received very uneasy signals from our embassy. Well, I would like to read the report from our embassy in Minsk when the release of protesters started. Well, it describes the situation well. We half of the day near the detention center. Many protesters have been released. We do not know the exact numbers. We believe that about 19 people may be still be detained. Doctors actually are waiting to give their assistance and their help. Some people are waiting for the possibility to get back their things and their possessions. Different international companies are providing assistance. They're helping the detainees. One person needs 3 hours to collect all the necessary information. Many detainees, before being released, sign anything that they are asked. They don't remember time or details due to the stress. Catholic priests are also waiting near the detention centers. They listened to the first reports and stories. People were beat, were tortured, their teeth were pulled out, they were electrocuted. Those that were not beaten were forced to wash the blood. 2 Polish and Ukrainian people were among the tortured detainees. One person was so shocked that he could not tell and could not say anything. Father Alexander was a Catholic priest who actually was very helpful. Actually, the name was given of Barsukov, who used to beat people. I don't want to expand a lot here. You know everything. This is not only the violation of human rights, but also the crimes that need to be examined and the perpetrators need to be punished. This is the right moment for us as well. Sovereignty, without any doubt, belongs to the people of Belarus, and the people of Belarus need our support. So let us do it. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Now I give the floor to Ingrida Šimonytė on behalf of the political group.
Kai man buvo 13,
When I was 13, my nation went to the streets in unity. People of art, teachers, old and young, left and right. They wanted to gain Europe. These were men and women. It was the entire Lithuania. First of all, they spoke about the restoration, ecology. They debated, they met their differences. When I was 15, the reestablishment of the state was achieved. And I was so angry at those countries in the West that didn't want to recognize the reestablishment of my own country. They wanted us to keep silent. It was for our leaders and our will and some people in the West that we managed to achieve what we have achieved it. I respect a consensus now. I still believe that countries that respect values can advocate those values. Minsk and small towns are marching in the streets with a peaceful message. This is a political message. They're not asking for bigger salaries. They're not asking for money. The nation is asking for justice, for fair elections, and the right to decide on their future. We can really understand those people. Young people of 15 in Belarus are looking at us as their supporters. Russia is also looking at us. We should not deceive ourselves. Russia or Kremlin has fed Lukashenko to the existing size. It was Kremlin that supported Belarus and the regime of Lukashenko. It was Kremlin that built the atomic nuclear monster in Belarus. Thanks to Lukashenko, the education in the Belarusian language was destroyed. Now we need the release of all the prisoners, and we need the information about the people who are considered to be missing. We need the release of political prisoners. But we have to understand that the political situation in Belarus will be very weak. For nearly 3 decades, Lukashenko has been killing any initiative. There is a risk to make the same mistake if we succeed to the dictator's regime. I am sure that Belarus is Europe. People who collect their garbage after the meeting are Europeans. This does not mean that my homeland is where I live. Belarusians are worth of being given a European alternative.
Pasaulis pasiektų kalinių išlaisvinimo ir pirmalaikių rinkimų organizavimo. Raginu visas vakarų
I invite all the Western democracies to reject the understanding that Belarus is the sphere of influence of Russia. I invite traditional European parties, liberals, conservatives, Greens, to offer their hands to those who will take part in the political discussion on Belarus. I'm glad that women have become the catalyst for freedom. Women that were not considered to be equal actually became the catalyst for this movement, for this protest. We can give different evaluations to the husbands of those women, but actually courage is something that those women really have. You can sustain your power by arms, but it is not very comfortable. No matter how much you lie, the regime has to fall. And this is a proof for all the dictators that people can be deceived for some time, but they cannot be deceived for all the time. And for us, in free democracies, I remind you that human dignity is a powerful weapon. Long live Belarus. Thank you, Ingrida Žimonytė. I give the floor to Juozas Bernatonis. Juozas, he's the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. On behalf of the interpreters, I'm asking all the speakers to slow down because we have a lot of interpreters and they have to interpret you into different languages. Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, on the 9th of August 2020, the elections have woken the Belarusian nation. A huge wave of protests in different cities and towns of Belarus shows that people in Belarus are ready for democratic changes. We are interested that democratic changes that are demanded by the Belarusian people are introduced in a peaceful manner. We cannot be silent when Oman clashes with peaceful protesters and the brutal force is being used. Today we know about the situation in Belarus not only from the media but also from the eyewitnesses and the representatives of the Belarusian opposition who are fighting for Belarus and its independence, and they are sacrificing their life for this. I believe that it's evident for everybody what is happening in Belarus. Why is it so important to Lithuania? Our nations share common history. We have always been friendly with our neighbors, and some people also are related by kin. Therefore, this pain is felt by us. We are ready to offer our hand and to help people in need. Lithuania has shown a rapid reaction. Linas Linkevičius, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, contacted his colleagues, ministers, and European Union officials. President Gitanas Nausėda contacted his colleagues. As the chairman of the Seimas Committee on Foreign Affairs, contacted my colleagues in Latvia and Poland, signed a common appeal to the European institutions with a request to stop the violence and persecution of the Belarusian people. This statement was given to all the colleagues in different countries. Belarusians are responsible nations. This is a courageous nation. And their courage inspires us to work together. We understand the difficulties and the challenges that Belarus faces today. We, parliaments of the neighboring countries, always stress our readiness to support the welfare of the Belarusian nation and the sovereignty of Belarus. We adopted unanimously statement in our committee by rejecting the results of the presidential election in Belarus. We also asked the Seimas to demand and request the rerun of elections and release of detainees and stopping of violence, and also proposal on any financial assistance to Belarusian NGOs. We also supported the convening of the extraordinary session. The situation in Belarus has changed dynamically over the recent days. These issues need to be solved together by all the democratic countries. In today's extraordinary session, we invite all the EU countries and NATO countries and their parliaments not to recognize the election results of the presidential election and to introduce sanctions for those who were involved in the falsification of the election results. Only unified actions of the European Union and NATO countries will force Belarus to stop violence and to come to the table of negotiations. It is not only in Belarus, but also in Europe in general, people start to understand that these changes in Belarus cannot be reversed. I thank you, Natonis. I give the floor to Tomas Tomilinas on behalf of his political group. I appeal to the people of Belarus and Lithuania. Part of them most probably supported dictator Lukashenko. Do not fear democracy and freedom, because it will not bring unemployment, privatization, because this is propaganda. See, look at us. In 30 years, we have made a lot of mistakes. We have a lot of social problems, but we are free. And in a democratic means, so we are addressing our problems. In several years, your new government will not apply shock therapy. You can learn from the mistakes that we have made. Don't close your eyes at the events in Belarus, because in free elections you will be able to choose whether to sustain free tertiary education or to have free healthcare. You will be able to join the free Bologna process. In today's parliament, we are considering these issues and we are trying to learn from our own mistakes. You will be able to avoid the basket experiment that we have made. Learn from our mistakes. We have experienced this difficult political discussion process, and we can share our experience with you. when you peacefully make your president step down, you will be able to choose. You still have political parties in your country. You have the right and the left parties. You will be able to choose which way to go from the 10 possible development scenarios. You have a well-functioning state apparatus, and it is evident that the rule of law is something that only your president and several people do not know. It means that bureaucracy works, and after this person steps down, everything will be fine. For 25 years, NGOs have improved the experience. Your NGOs have done that. I have lectured at several seminars, and I see that the civil society in Belarus has developed and is ready for change. Your country is facing a clear geopolitical choice. Belarusians are against the idea of integration of Belarus and Russia. I address the trade unions in Belarus who have not joined others in strike. You have become the major force and the main fear of the regime. You will decide your own fate after the former president steps down. Yes, neoliberal agenda from different countries will be proposed to you. Different recipes will be proposed, but you will manage to choose rightly, and you will decide your own fate. You will avoid repeating our mistakes. I address and appeal Chernobyl nation. Only free people like you can stop this disaster in Astravets. Nuclear power plants that have been constructed but were not launched is numerous. Only peace and intolerance to nuclear power is the basis of Belarusian identity. As Belarusians, you are the people who evaluate and who value peace and oppose nuclear disaster. After throwing down this regime, you will be able to make the decisions that are needed. Long live Belarus. Thank you, Mr. Tomilinas. Now I give the floor to Rasa Budbergytė to speak on behalf of her political group.
Thank you so much, colleagues. After such a passionate speech by Tomas Tomilinas, I would like to invite you to go back to what's going on in Belarus today. The authorities of Belarus have been limiting people's rights and freedoms, and the strikes and protests taking place in Belarus have a lot of reasons. Some are related to bloodshed and acts of violence, serious restrictions. However, some are related to the economic situation in the country. Social Democrats in Lithuania urge everyone not to recognize the results of the presidential election legitimate, and we support the aspiration of Belarusian nation to self-determination, which way to choose. And we see that there is actually no other way than the rule of law and the road of democracy. We support the plan launched by our president for Belarus regarding de-escalation of the situation, release of all the participants of process, and start a dialogue between the authorities and its people. We also support the idea of holding new elections, and we believe that the resolution which is on the agenda of our Seimas today is an important step. The situation in Belarus is changing on a daily basis. However, it seems that next to inaction of democratic channels, the efforts of NGOs and opposition, as well as their strengthening, is of key importance. And Lithuania plays an important role here in strengthening all the democratic powers in the neighboring country. We support all the initiatives, and we express our solidarity with the Belarusian people, first of all, who have the right to choose the future of their country without any declarations, because this time has already passed and the regime of Lukashenko has to be held accountable. The West has to be aware of the complicated situation in Belarus, the same way as we feel it here when living in the neighborhood. Since we have common history with the country, the conflict situation has to be resolved, the political crisis has to be resolved, and we fully support the people in Belarus. Žive Belarus. Thank you, Rasa Budbergytė. Now I give the floor to Viktorija Čmilytė Nilsen.
Prašom, Viktorija.
Thank you. Colleagues, history has given us another chance to defend democracy, to show to our neighbors and the whole world what Lithuania and its people strives for. We have expressed our clear position to the Lukashenko regime, who has blood stains on his hands. The convulsions of the regime is a really shaking picture. Our role today is to express our clear position, to invite our neighbors, leaders of the EU member states, to support the Belarusian people and provide all the necessary support. A few things are of key importance today. We must demand for holding new, fair, democratic elections, stop use of force against peaceful protesters, and release all the people held in custody. Every day we hear new evidence about tortures in detention places. This is why we should call for immediate release of all the detainees. Today we are discussing the resolution which was signed by all political factions in Lithuania, which shows that in the face of such drastic events, we managed to stay united. I think that the role of women is really striking in Belarus today. Their determination, their courage. We bow our heads against all these women, mothers, who are fighting for a brighter future for themselves and their children. The history has given us a chance to show how much light and truth we have in our hearts, and that it is not only the beautiful words that we repeat without thinking. Let us stay principled. Let us support the Belarusian nation. Thank you. Colleagues, I give the floor to Gabrielius Landsbergis, the leader of the opposition.
Prašom, kolega.
Ačiū, gerbiamas pirmininkė, gerbiami kolegos.
Thank you, colleagues.
Prieš 190 metų
190 years ago,
jaunas diplomatas
a young
Alexis de Tocqueville
French diplomat, Alexis de Tocqueville,
dėmesio skyrė šios
when
privalumams
analyzing the democracy, has spoken a lot about fight against despotism. He said,
diktatoriui nerūpi ar
the
žmonės
dictator
myli
doesn't
tol,
care whether he is
kol jie
loved by
nepradeda
people
mylėti vieni kitų.
until they start loving each other.
Tai, ką mes matome šiandien
What we
Baltarusijoje,
see in
yra
Belarus
diktatoriaus
today
pabaiga.
is the end of
Nes atsirado
dictatorship.
tai, ko nuo istorijos pradžios bijojo kiekvienas diktatorius. Žmonių vienybė
Because
ir
the
bendras
unity
siekis
of
užtikrinti
people
savo laisvę.
and the unified
Lukašenkai
aspiration
nerūpėjo,
for their
kad žmonės
freedom
galvoja apie jį tol,
is
kol
something
žmonės
that
nepradėjo rūpintis
symbolizes
kitais.
the end of dictatorship. People do care about each other. They care about those who are beaten up or tortured,
Susodinti opozicijos lyderiai.
who are detained.
Prieš 2 metus Minske
2 years ago,
matėme
in
atskirus
Grodno, in the city of Minsk, we saw just individual people. But today we see the nation, united nation, who care that the political theater that lasted for 30 years is
Lukašenka
over.
baiminasi ne savo politinės ateities,
Lukashenko is not afraid
bet
of
labiau baiminasi
political
dėl savo gyvybės.
future, but more for his life.
Muammaris Gaddafi,
Saddam Hussein,
Nikolai
Gaddafi,
Ceausescu
Nikolai
primena, kad
Ceausescu,
diktatorių istorijos retai baigėsi džiugiai.
all these narratives show that
Baltarusijos revoliucija
the
spręsis
end of
Baltarusijoje,
dictatorship
ne Vilniuje, ne
may
Briuselyje
be
ir Vašingtone.
quite
Ir aš tikiu,
hard.
kad šios žmonių
I do
bendrystės
believe that the unity of people will bring the desired results. Almost 30 years ago, Lithuania was strongly supported by Iceland, the country that had strong commercial ties with the former Soviet Union. Nevertheless, it expressed the recognition of a free Lithuania. Lithuania today can become like Iceland. Russia and its regime have tried to split Europe, encourage countries to join into the compromise. We are going to do that today. Lukashenko is just a former president. We are going to adopt a resolution witnessing that. But I believe that Lithuanian ambassador who is residing in Minsk today has to come back to Lithuania so that the new ambassador will present his credentials to the new president. The Global Magnitsky Act should be applied to Lukashenko and his environment. Lithuania will never be used as a shelter for the dictator. From now on, we should also help the reviving Belarusian nation. Let us allocate at least 5 million euro to Belarus. As we know, Poland has allocated as much as 50 million zloty. I believe that a new example is contagious. Dictators are afraid of the unity of people and the unity of nations. So, for your freedom and ours, brothers Belarusians.
Kolegos, kviečiu Povilą Urbšį.
Thank you, Gabrielius Landsbergis. Now I give the floor to Povilas Urbšys. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have already heard, we are all united by the Vytis, the rider, with the nation of Belarus. Today we stand together for the values tested by ages. My warning is, if by adopting the resolution we will focus on an exceptional role of the patrons who have the right to prompt what Belarus has to do, it would be a mistake. What we have to do is to preserve the special respect to Belarus, because all the mistakes will be used by Putin's regime, without doubt. This is something that none of us are looking forward to. The Belarusian aspiration to become a democratic state is important to Europe. However, if Belarus does not have sufficient political will to escape the merge with Putin's Russia, all the efforts will be empty. They will not bring new fruit of freedom. Instead, we will become just the chess on Putin's chess game. Just like 30 years ago, on the 11th of March, today we are going to adopt a document that may bring an end to non-democracy. Not only in Belarus, but also Russia. I very much hope that the democratic community will be firm and we will never step aside from the democratic way in the future. Thank you, Aušrinė Armonaitė. Thank you.
Sąžiningai laimi rinkimus, neatjungia valstybės nuo pasaulio, atjungiant savo žmonėms internetą ir mobilųjį ryšį.
The ones who win democratic elections will never choose to disconnect people from internet. They would never organize acts of violence against men, women, young people, children, and even senior citizens. For 26 years, the opposition and free media were put into prisons, was pulled from the country. However, the symbols of new changes appear today where you would never expect them. And Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya has become one of such symbols. Probably she would have never thought about that herself. Hundreds of thousands of people in Belarusian cities today have reminded us in Lithuania about an isolated sister of our history. We have many more years of our common history than those 50 years in the Soviet Union or 26 years of Lukashenko's regime. Our history is much more fundamental. And when we see the historical flags, Minsk and other cities, they do remind us of our common history in the framework of the Western civilization. And our duty today is to sacrifice our material interests, be it the harbor, be it Acropolis shopping center. All this is nothing compared to historic values like democracy and the right to self-expression. Martin Luther King said something about injustice spread to justice everywhere. This is why we have to actively support our brothers and sisters in Belarus, the people on the Belarusian streets. And remember that in our own country, we have to be a fortress of freedom that defends the right to self-expression and that respects every person and his rights. Žavė Belarus. Thank you. Laurynas Kasčiūnas, the floor is yours.
Colleagues, I had an opportunity to work on the issues of Belarus for several years in different NGOs, analytical centers, and for 4 years in the parliamentary group for democratic Belarus. I would be very happy if in this term of office we would not need such a group in our parliament, and we would be able to have official relations with the democratically elected Belarusian parliament. This is nearly a reality now. In those several years, I felt myself that I'm getting used to the idea or the conviction that the Belarusian nation is not able to get away from this regime. I myself actually started to feel this. Yes, we met with the representatives of oppositional forces, but I would have this feeling anyway. And these days have showed that this was only a myth, that Belarusians are worth of their sovereignty. This is a nation that has woken up. This is a nation that is worth of a democratic future, and it is extremely important. I firmly believe that this nation will become a European one, and this is also our own wish and hope. Another myth that is living in Lithuania and around the world, that the former president is allegedly a guarantee of Belarusian sovereignty. And when we used to consider and discuss about the future of this country, we faced the idea that it could be worse. And now he is only the president of Oman. He started his discussions with Moscow, and his house of cards has collapsed. And now we have to think over it in a serious way. This self-determination of the Belarusian nation should not be stolen by another regime, so that the Belarusian nation is not included into the Union state, so that additional military base is not built in Belarus, and that the border that we have with Belarus does not become the border with Russia. This is a challenge, and this is our strategical goal. The future of Belarus has to be decided in Belarus. Nobody has the right to steal this revolution. And here we have to think what we can do here. Poland has declared a 5-point plan which can well fit to Lithuania. First, assistance to persecuted people, comprehensive assistance, assistance to free media, independent media, because this is extremely important now in Belarus, assistance to NGOs that prove that they are able to be independent. These are long-term goals, and I hope that our government has an action plan. We can propose one if the government doesn't have one. Our political group in the parliament has proposed the list of 39 people in the close to Lukashenko's regime who are responsible for the crimes and violence, and they should be included into the Magnitsky list. These people should not be permitted into Lithuania. And this could be made as a signal sent by our Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this would be a great example to the European Union before the tomorrow's meeting, that this list should become the list of the entire European Union. We should not speak about visas only. We should speak about economic sanctions. These people have to know that if they choose the nation, they can be removed from the list. And I hope that the European Union will join us in our considerations for our freedom and yours. Thank you, Laurynas. Colleagues, I would like to give the floor to Mindaugas Puidokas. Mindaugai, the floor is yours. In the Baltic Way and during the Singing Revolution, Lithuania showed that it can peacefully stand for its freedom. The Belarusian nation is doing this today, and we can see the images when people are so friendly in protesting. And the entire world sees them, and they show to the world that they can be friendly, and they can friendly express their will to be independent, free and democratic country. And it's not only Lithuania, but the entire world has heard the Belarusian nation and its will that this nation wants to be free, democratic, and that it wants its voice to be heard. And it is unavoidable. This mass of people on the streets who are firm in their decision will determine the future of Belarus. This is our neighboring brotherly nation that we share history with. We share common struggles, common battles. All the nations, Belarusians, Lithuanians, and Polish, as well as Ukrainians, can live together in freedom. And I hope that the European Union will take resolute and correct steps so that the energy and union of this people does not die in vain, to prevent the Russian military power stationed at the border with Lithuania. We have to do everything to avoid that.
tikrai nepakanka.
And it's not enough only to discuss that.
Su sąjungininkais Jungtinėse Amerikos valstijose, kad ta pozicija būtų bendra.
We need to have a unified position, a strong and firm position, and I hope that Lithuanian leaders speak of the Seimas, the president and the prime minister will present a clear vision of Lithuania,
Priimti sprendimai ir Jungtinėse Amerikos valstijose, ir Europos Sąjungoje būtų
so that the decisions taken in the USA and in the European Union are unified,
30-mečius ir taptų ne tik tai
and we can freely celebrate the 30th anniversary of the freedom in a democratic country. Long live Belarus. I thank Mindaugas Puidokas. Colleagues, I would like to discuss with you
visų politinių jėgų atstovai.
the representatives of all political forces have made their statements. I could give the floor to Naglis Puteikis, but I don't see him. 1 minute, just we have Algirdas Sysis wanted to say something. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have shortened the first part of our session. According to the agenda, we can finish at 12:45. I think that the remaining 9 people can speak. I don't agree with Mr. Žygimantas Pavilionis that we should not correct the text of the resolution. I don't think that we should agree with that. We will have to vote for this resolution. Therefore, it can be amended, I believe. Now let us continue the discussion. I would like to give the floor to Robertas Šaknickas. Dear leaders of Europe and dear people of Belarus, members of the Seimas, I'm addressing you not only as a member of the Seimas, but as a father and a member of the Seimas Commission on the Children's Welfare. We all have egoistic wishes to be safe and free. And we say to you, fear not. Today, people in Belarus are courageous, and they courageously want to change their history. Therefore, our small and grand nation will fight with you. Belarusian children today who hold those posters saying, bring back my father home, with tears in their eyes. And those posters are being torn in their hands. The hearts of their mothers are torn as well. But they still have hopes. I believe that the issues and the problems will be resolved. But it will be very hard. And I can see this. When I look at to the west, unfortunately, we see some defiance to present a firm stance. Well, they are horrified and they observe and follow the situation in Belarus over the Atlantic. But this can have a painful repercussions. The time is against our neighbors. And unfortunately, it might be against Europe. Therefore, I ask the Western democracies to show adequate reaction. We are one nation. It's a difficult hour. For us, for a small nation, such as Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians or Polish, really need your voice. Don't be afraid to give your firm stance and firm position. Let those children put those postcards and receive their fathers and meet their fathers at home. Long live Belarus. I thank Robertas. I give the floor to Naglis Puteikis. Thank you. Colleagues, violence exerted by police and other special forces is unjustifiable, but it is a chance to speak about the possibility of expressing another opinion in Lithuania. I would like to remind you that Asta Strauskaitė, a teacher that used to wave in Škirpos alley, was arrested by police. Her home was searched, her purse was searched, and she was illegitimately detained. She was illegitimately hurt. And this is one of the examples how our police can act. Well, certainly our police don't beat people with batons. Well, they do not do this at all. But the behavior against teacher Astrauskaitė for expressing her opinion is unpermissible. During the first days of protests, people were detained for waving the tricolor flag. Astra Strauskaitė, a teacher in Lithuania, is still persecuted by the Lithuanian judicial authorities. On the 17th each month, people who are interested in the fate of Venckienės issue cannot get any answers. And people who protested with their masks asking for truth were faced by the police. I want to stress that I'm against the violence in Belarus. The state Belarusian television showed that observers were not allowed in many polling stations, and the results that were published about the results that were published are falsified. However, we, the Lithuanian politicians, need to ensure the constitutional rights of our own citizens to express a different opinion and to criticize openly the opinion of the official opinion. Unfortunately, in the concrete case that I mentioned, the police and its actions were illegitimate, and we need to adopt a similar resolution on the actions of police in Lithuania. If we are adopting resolutions on human rights in other countries, we need to take all the measures that Lithuanian mayors do not give illegitimate orders to Lithuanian police, and that the Lithuanian police abides by the rules and the law. Thank you, colleagues. I give the floor to Mantas Adomėnas. Please ask, I would like to address the leaders of political groups. Please ask your members to come back to the hall because we will be voting in a short time. I will start to speak briefly. Several years ago, I presented a resolution after the previous presidential elections when Vladimir Nikolaev spoke to us, including other candidates that were arrested and detained, and smaller crowds went to the streets in Minsk. As Mr. Kashunas said, those who have been cooperating with the Belarusian Democrats for years believe that nothing cannot change, but revolution can happen very swiftly, similarly to what happened during the restoration movement Sąjūdis. We see similar revolution now in Minsk, in Belarus. I wanted to speak about the threats. We have to define them clearly. This revolution can be stolen by Russia, which seeks to destabilize the geopolitical order in Europe and seeks to implement its neo-imperialistic ambitions on. We can see this in Ukraine, in Georgia, and this period can become a great chance for unlawful actions. It can take different form, but we have to prepare for this because because we saw that Russia used all the geopolitical weaknesses to destabilize the situation in Europe. And here we need to clearly understand that we will not be able to do this on our own, and we need resolute action of Europe. And this is a great chance for European policy. So far, the neighborhood policy has been the story of unsuccess. Sometimes Russia or even China has more power in Europe. For example, if we look at Serbia or Turkey, we can see that the neighborhood policy of the European Union needs to show at least one story of success. And this is a great chance to create an effective European policy. And this document that we are considering is a great opportunity to take the initiative and to establish an effective policy, EU policy towards Belarus. Western democracies have been urged not to stand aside but to act. And it is also very important that the European policy should not be reactive. It has to be proactive. It has to model the situation towards preventing the annexation of Belarus by Russia. We should not allow this revolution to be stolen. Imperialistic power should not steal this revolution, and this is our responsibility. We have to unite the European Union, consolidate the European Union for this goal. Thank you. I thank Mr. Adomėnas. I give the floor to Vytautas Bakas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, with Povilas Urbšys, we have registered a proposal for the resolution. I think it is very important. A representative of the civil society and the opposition of Belarus have asked us to pay attention to this. We should not forget that Alexander Lukashenko for many years has killed or has been responsible for killing his political opponents and persecution of his political opponents. There are many people who are missing: journalists, politicians, officials, officers. In our resolution, we should remind that to the Western communities and to ourselves that Alexander Lukashenko is not a former president or an outgoing president, but that all his terms of offices are based on human victims. Therefore, we should decide on the possibility to amend the text and maybe gathering to the session in the afternoon later on and to indicate that, include that into the resolution. This is very important. Therefore, we ask to consider that and to agree to that. Thank you. I give the floor to Algirdas Sysas. Laurynas Kasčiūnas wanted to say a few remarks. Well, the time is very important. No text is perfect, but I think that in spirit this text is perfect. I think we should not stop the process because today we're having the European Council. Laurynas, just because tomorrow we're having the European Council, the Council should be reminded of the behavior of Lukashenko. This text is very important, but it does not include a very important component. The power has not been usurped today or yesterday, but many years ago. This has to be reminded. Mr. Sysas, colleagues, friends, I think that we have gathered to help the Belarusian nation. Not to boast. I understand that this resolution would not be signed by everybody, but ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, well, I really hope that Belarus will be free because my parents are from Belarus. Don't blame us for distorting the text. I agree. I oppose to what is happening in Belarus. These baton parades happened in Lithuania during the Soviet times. And I was beaten by batons. But this is happening in the middle of Europe in the 21st century. I support peaceful demonstrations in Belarus. But we have to include in the resolution clearly. We have the flag here. It was adopted by the legitimately elected parliament. Let us define everything clearly. Lukashenko was elected in legitimate elections. I observed two elections in the OSCE. It was very difficult because we were not allowed to approach the table during the counting of results. Everybody thinks that it is clear that the results were falsified. Why I spoke about trade unions, independent trade unions, because state trade unions are the power of Lukashenko. Today the situation has changed. State-owned factories started striking. Is it so bad if we include independent trade unions among the NGOs and civil society? They need that. They have been fighting with the regime for so many years. We can postpone the adoption. We do not need this show. We need to adopt the resolution which is approved by all the members of the Seimas. I don't like when something is decided for me. We have gathered here to say freely what is happening in Belarus, dear colleagues. There are talks about sending delegations to Belarus. This is nonsense because we will not be let in. But even if we do that, this should not be members of the Committee on National Security and Defense, maybe members of the Committee of Human Rights or members of the Committee of European Affairs. Well, national security is not the committee that should not go to Belarus. This committee should be preoccupied with other matters. So let's not be funny. Now, can we agree that Egidijus Vareikis will be the last in our debate? Good afternoon. I will be about the draft resolution. Not on behalf of Lithuania. I will speak about the reaction of other European countries. I must say that the situation is rather sad. I will start by saying that my relationship with Belarus is not very nice. Several years ago, I was an observer at the presidential election in Belarus. After those elections, I wrote a report. And when I did that, I became a persona non grata in Belarus. And Belarus does not let me in, even with the patriotic mission. Now, what is happening in European capitals? Before the elections, I observed and I followed the European capitals, and I did not find any opinion of the great European politicians who would even have a slightest idea of elections being won by another person rather than Lukashenko. It means that we are not prepared for the change of the regime. Well, certainly there were ideas that Belarusians will try, and I'm really ashamed that Europe is not ready and was not ready for the change of the regime. Because after the elections, I heard very sad phrases. Well, elections were held, people protested, well, it's sad. Well, children should be released, they should go to the table of negotiations, and dialogue should be held. Dialogue with whom? With Lukashenko? if we don't recognize Lukashenko as a president, can we hold a dialogue with him? On the 13th of January, do you remember, after the 13th of January, we were offered to go to the table of negotiations. And Mr. Landsbergis said that he cannot negotiate with criminals. So, in this case, if we speak about dialogue in Belarus, it should not be with Lukashenko. Rerun of elections should be held only when where the dictator is overthrown, because the elections follow the rules of the dictator. EU policy towards Belarus has been unsuccessful. Can it be successful if this country has been governed by a president for 26 years? Dictators need to be overthrown. They have no right to be in their posts. But some in our community say that we have to talk with dictators. Well, Mr. Gorbachev was the dictator that can be talked to, but the majority of dictators have been overthrown. We should not talk to the dictators, but we should solve the problem. I agree with many previous speakers. Lukashenko can be overthrown not by Democrats, but by Moscow. Therefore, we don't need to adopt the resolution only. We need to closely follow and to actively invite Europe to change its policy and make it more effective. Thank you, Eugenijus Gentvilas.
Nepavyksta užbaigti.
We still have colleagues willing to talk. Colleagues, I will try to be brief. I think it was only Mantas Adomėnas who clearly mentioned what I have in mind to say, which are not in the resolution, even though I am not proposing them to be included. However, we have to keep in mind where the future of Belarus will be decided. I fully agree that it has to be done in Belarus, but what I fear is that its future may be decided by Moscow. And this is where we should focus our attention to. What to do to ensure that the future of Belarus is decided in Belarus, not elsewhere. Lukashenko was selling the sovereignty of the country in foreign policy area, in economic sector. This was how the sovereignty of Belarus went into Russia's hands. And today, they will probably find more arguments even compared to Ukraine, where they needed the green men, as you all know. In Belarus, Russia may make some very serious steps. This is why the focus of Lithuania and other democratic European countries should be focused on preserving the sovereignty of the country. It has to be a concentrated policy. I'm looking at Juozas Bernatonis, our strategist of foreign policy, as well as our foreign minister, urging to think about prevention of Russia to take everything into its own hand. Vilija Aleknaitė Bramikienė, thank you. Colleagues, I would just like to add a few words to what Mantas Adomėnas and Eugenijus Gentvilas said. Indeed, today, the most important thing for us is to adopt a resolution. Namely, today, it is not a formal act because the fate of our brotherly country is being resolved today. It is taking place in Minsk and other Belarusian cities. I worked in the Parliamentary Assembly of ESCO for a number of years, and I can assure you that Lukashenko's election has never been recognized as legitimate, neither the parliamentary elections in the country. But in order to increase the legitimate power of our resolution, one thing is lacking. One thing was lacking in the past, which is the clearly expressed political will of the nation, which we see today. I would like to address those who are listening to us on behalf of the Kremlin, and they are following what's going on here today. I also hope that the fate of Belarus will not be resolved by Moscow and the Kremlin. I would like to remind our colleagues from Russia of the end of September 1988, the so-called Party of Batons, when we had a rally in Vilnius and people were beaten by batons on the central cathedral square in Vilnius. Some people were detained as well. However, our court, it was the Soviet court, did not punish the perpetrators. The moment comes when the nation says enough is enough. The president of Oman awarded a number of criminals who are beating their fellow citizens up. He probably hopes that the Oman forces will be celebrating the power, the victory. Lukashenko has made a mistake, thinking that if the nation has survived with his leadership for so many years, they will continue further surviving and putting up with his dictatorship. But that was his mistake. What we see today is that the Belarusian nation is a dignified nation and determined to decide what future holds for it. I'm not addressing the elite representatives of the country, but rather the nomenclature. It's a subtle question, in fact. The larger part of the Communist Party of the then Lithuania chose to go together with the nation. I have been having ties with nomenclature representatives in Belarus, and I believe that these people will finally understand that their decision may save lives in Lithuania and mitigate the transition process. Colleagues, please think whether it's worthwhile to turn away from your own nation. Thank you.
Julius Sabatauskas.
Yes, Julius Sabatauskas.
Prašom, kolega.
Gerbim kolegos,
Colleagues,
gerbimi Baltarusijos tautos atstovai,
Belarusian representatives,
mes svarstom rezoliuciją
today we are discussing a resolution at the time when the Belarusian nation
laisvėja.
is
Žmonės išėję į gatvę skanduoja,
fighting for its freedom.
jokiais diktatoriais
People are
skanduoja,
chanting
išeik.
on the streets of Belarus, chanting, leave. Stop deciding for us. We want to decide how we want to live in the future.
Jie priešinasi
People are resisting
kažkada mes,
in a peaceful manner, like we did
prieš 30
more than 30 years ago.
taikių būdų. Pasakė,
By
kad
peaceful
mes
means,
laisvos Lietuvos.
we expressed
Taip
our
dabar
will,
Baltarusiai
our desire to have a free Lithuania.
eina link to.
Likewise, in Belarus, people today
Išspręsti
are fighting
savo problemas.
peacefully
Ne valstybiniam smurtui,
in the neighboring country, saying no
siautėjimui,
to the brutality of Oman forces,
kitų valstybių kišimui.
as well as interference of other countries.
Vadovų tarybos,
This is why,
vadovų tarybos išvakarėse
on the eve of the European Council summit today, we have to clearly state
ilgalaikį
that the violence has been
pritariu kolegom, kurie
long term, and I agree with my colleagues
prelegentai šiandien dalyvavę diskusijai.
who participated in the discussion today. People have been tortured, detained,
Dingdavo.
and even went missing.
Arba kur jų kapas. Kad tokie dalykai negali būti pamiršti,
Such
kad tai turi būti
incidents may not be forgotten, they have to be investigated. Today we have to also think,
sakydamas,
and I mean the European Union,
pasikartotų Ukrainos
we must
rytų,
avoid
taip vadinamų
the
atsiskyrusių
East Ukrainian
Donetsko ir Luhansko,
story,
kabutėse,
Donetsk, Luhansk republics,
Ukrainas tas
so that the same scenario is not
gelbėti
thrown on Belarus with Putin's decision to save the country,
karinės intervencijas, kuri
to avoid the military intervention
58-56 metais
like the one in 1968 in Prague, as well as Budapest before that, when Soviets brought their military
lyderius,
trying
kurie
to
sugalvojo pasukti valstybių vystymasi kitą kryptim į vakarus,
support,
juos numalšinti ir nuversti,
to
kad neatsirastų
suppress
valstybės kariuomenė
the will
Baltarusijai,
of the country leaders who wanted to choose the Western way.
laisvės siekį, bet ir
We witness a similar situation today,
ją kraujyje.
so we have
Todėl
to be really careful.
rezoliucija,
While discussing
jeigu
the
neįrašysime
resolution,
tų siekių, tai būtinai turim nedaryti
even if we don't add additional wording, maybe we should not at least make historical mistakes by adding that there is no international organization
po 94 Liepos 10
recognizing the fact
prezidento rinkimų.
that
Nes ir ta vėliava
neither presidential nor parliamentary elections since 1994 have ever been fair and free. Thank you.
Ačiū.
Long live Belarus. Rimantas Jonas Dagys. Colleagues, we are discussing the wording of the resolution today. However, I believe that it is not the text, the wording, which we should focus upon right now. We have had many resolutions adopted in the past. However, what we need to decide is our actions. The nation of Belarus has expressed its will. This is obvious. The question is, what are we going to tell? Is it only the wording of the resolution, or whether, as a part of the European Union, full-fledged members of the European Union, we will do everything we can? It is obvious that the nation that is fighting against the dictator by peaceful protests needs a vision for the future. And the European Union has to show that vision instead of hiding under beautiful phrases, but rather stating that we are looking forward to embrace Belarus in our family, so that the country has a clear path. It is very important for people who are protesting today, because this is something that unites us, that shows a clear goal, and this is how the results can be achieved. They have to believe that they will not be left alone in their fight. I don't believe European Union will make it very easily, because we have a lot of problems and issues to be resolved. There is a lack of understanding what we are going to do later. And perhaps the Baltic states and Poland take the leadership here, because we are the ones who know what is needed when you aspire to overthrow the dictatorship. Therefore, let me call on you to stay strongly united and express our firm stance. This is something that we should focus upon as a parliament today. Let Belarus give hope and a vision for the future. I don't believe that Russia will remain passive in the process. Just remember what plans have been created and what treaties have been put in place. So this makes me have some doubts about its passive role. Everything depends on who has more energy, whether it's the Russia or the European Union in this situation. Thank you. Vytautas Juozapaitis, please. I know it's time, but the colleagues are eager to express their opinion. Thank you, Chairman. Every dictatorship has its own peculiarities. Whether be it Hitler, Stalin, Lukashenko, who are focusing on culture a lot, clearly understanding that it is namely through culture you can effectively wash someone's brain, someone's identity, and insert another code. Thanks God, and thanks the Belarusian nation for maintaining, for preserving and passing this test. The nation that today stands against the dictator not holding weapon in the hands, but rather a light expression of singing revolution again. People trying to conquer the evil peacefully. The dark cloud that is in our neighbor's sky today, it's namely the people of culture, the formers of opinion may revive the historic memory. The country is strong with. However, the actor that I don't want to call the president today desperately undertakes actions like the National Janka Kupala theater director resignation, because he was the one who dared to support the protesters. The members of staff of the theater are ready to join the director and go to the streets. We have many examples that we can be proud of on behalf of our neighbors, because this is how they express their position. Some may not consider it serious, but I believe that this is the most serious way, unconquered singing revolution. Let me just encourage all the representatives of the cultural sector to encourage them to support our sisters and brothers in Belarus in this fight of the singing revolution, because this is the only way we can maintain our spiritual relations. Because Vytis, the night, is what connects these two historical nations. Thank you, Dovilė Šakalienė. Colleagues, thank you for your patience. I think it's quite symbolic that I'm speaking the last in this discussion. However, this is not our last act in trying to help our neighbor. It is painful to see what's going on in Belarus today, but probably it was hard to expect something else in view of the dictatorship that we have had in our neighborhood. Maybe you all also heard that the dictator has awarded as many as 300 people who were fighting against the peaceful protesters on Belarusian streets. I believe that today we are having this session in our parliament, which sends a strong political message that despite of diversing opinions regarding the wording of the resolution, we have anyway managed to stay united and convene here today to debate this document while realizing that the formal position of a small country like Lithuania with respect to illegitimate dictatorship and the dictator who is performing brutal, illegal actions, violence against his own citizens that can be viewed as an international crime. So, adoption of the resolution today is one of the many steps that we will have to make if we really want a democratic state next to Lithuania. Žive Belarus.
Ačiū Dovilei, mėly kolegos.
Thank you, Dovile. Now, dear colleagues, so we finished the debate, and according to the statute, and it's Article 184. Now we have to decide whether to adopt the resolution without amendments. If we can also decide on the amendment of the resolution and decide on the rejection of the resolution. Now, do we agree on the adoption of the resolution without amendment? Arvydas Anušauskas for. Colleagues, I propose to adopt the resolution as it is. We can amend every document to perfection. Time is very important now, because at least symbolically we have to show our solidarity. It can take the form of a resolution or a delegation. I don't agree that certain specific committees should form a delegation to go to Belarus. These are people who are democratically elected. They are Lithuanians and feel solidarity with the Belarusian people who seek democratic elections. On our part, we have to show a certain sign of solidarity with those people. I wanted to remind you that the events in Belarus in the recent week and a bit earlier are the violations of human rights, brutal violations of human rights. We saw that in social media about people who were tortured, who were detained, imprisoned in violation to the current laws of Belarus. Therefore, we have to be very careful. Well, human rights violations can become considered crimes, and we should not forget that. Pavelas Rupšys is against. Members of the Seimas, I want to ask you, do we adopt this resolution for ourselves or for the Belarusian nation? If we do this for the Belarusian nation, we have to include things that are important to them, because in the article we include the issue of the nuclear power plant in Astravets. With Mr. Barkas, we also propose the inclusion of something which matters to the Belarusian nations, the crimes committed by Lukashenko against his nation, and the possible legal evaluation of those crimes. And if you reject this proposal and adopt the resolution without amendment, will mean that this is just a democratic show for the sake of your own business. Well, we can disagree about details, but I invite you to support the resolution in support of the Belarusian people who today rose in their fight for freedom. Personally, I thought that more than 10 years I've been protesting against the injustice in Belarus and with the NGOs in Belarus, supporting the media, the social media, the NGOs. You can always bring the same poster during the protests. In 2011, we brought the poster saying Vladashenko. Belarus always had people who always believed in the freedom of Belarus. But today, the numbers are much bigger. Hundreds of thousands of people protest. And today, Vladashenko's regime is falling apart. We have got used to injustice in this country. But today we can see that these efforts were not in vain, because the hope in freedom was always alive in that country. So today we can support the opposition, and we should do that. I invite everybody to support the resolution. Well, we are out of time, and some colleagues ask why should we continue with the sitting. Well, actually, we prolong the sitting. I'm for the resolution. Mr. Bakas, I'm for the resolution. Now we're discussing on the possibility whether to amend it or not. Colleagues, I just want to remind you that Lithuania and other Baltic states refer to ourselves as experts of Eastern politics. And the Belarusian opposition actually hopes. How do we call president, former president, outgoing president, illegitimate president? We should not adopt formal resolutions. We should provide an expertise. And expertise says that Mr. Lukashenko is an alleged criminal, and his activities have to be investigated and has to be tried for his crimes. I think that this is the basis. If he is a criminal, we should not negotiate with criminals. And the international community should be invited to initiate international investigations. And we have to include this in the resolutions if we want to be called and referred to as the experts of Eastern politics and Eastern policies. Vilija Abramikene. I understand the colleagues who want to amend the resolution, but I want to remind you that this is just the first political step of ours. And by this step, we commit ourselves not only to vote for the resolution, but also to observe and follow the situation and to take every effort of support and assistance. I've heard the Belarusian crowd chanting tribunal, tribunal. We should not decide for the Belarusian nation how they should evaluate the criminals who detain, who violated and bet other people. I think that the immediate adoption of the resolution is an important step. So let us leave other steps for the future. Let us vote for the resolution. Mr. Paviljonis, for. In presenting the resolution, I asked everyone to forget the differences that we have. Tomorrow we are having the European Council. Not all the countries can agree on everything. Some be prepared to help him. Not all the countries are willing to demand a rerun of elections. But if we don't agree on the resolution today, we will not have a united voice tomorrow in the European Council. It is not easy to present our voice in the European Council. So let us support our Minister of Foreign Affairs so that we have a united position of Lithuania. Let us not get lost in the detail. Today we are in the front of this process today, and I'm asking everybody to adopt the resolution without the amendment. We will have many sittings and we will be able to discuss and include the details. We do not oppose to your proposal, but we are asking to support the resolution in total. I just want to remind you that we have our minister here. I hope that we will give our proposal to the president. And we don't have documents that would include everything. So I invite you to vote for this resolution, to adopt the resolution without any amendments. The voting has started. Colleagues, 122 votes, 124 with no against and 2 abstentions. So the resolution of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania on the situation in the Republic of Belarus following the falsified presidential election adopted. Thank you, colleagues. I give the floor to the Speaker of the Seimas. He has the right to speak without... Colleagues, I wanted to speak. Well, I voted for the resolution. I want to send a message to the Belarusian nation. They're returning today to the real neighborhood and European policy. We should speak about long-term targets today and goals today. Thank you, everybody. I give the floor to Tomas Tomilinas. Please have patience. We are just about to end the sitting. I will read the resolution in the Belarusian language because of my Belarusian origin. Please let me do that.
Сейм Литовской Республики, подкресливаючи, что выники выборов президента, что проходили у Республицы Беларусь 9 жнивня 2020 года, были сфальсификованные. Звертаючи увагу, что ніводныя міжнародныя арганізацыі не прызналі ў них выбораў парламента і прэзідэнта, якія дагэтуль адбываліся ў Беларусі свабоднымі і справядлівымі. У адказ на мірныя акцыі пратэсту жыхароў Беларусі, якія пачаліся адразу пасля 9 жніўня, распачалося грубае і задушэннае, у выніку чаго тысячы пратэстоўцаў былі арыштаваныя, параненыя, есть загінулыя. Выражаем усебаковую падтрымку рашэнню беларускага народа ствараць будучыню сваёй краіны ў адпаведнасці з дэмакратычнымі стандартамі і прынцыпамі вяршэнства права і правоў чалавека, што забяспечыць свабоду, незалежнасць і хутчэйшае збліжэнне Рэспублікі Беларусь з Еўрапейскім Саюзам. Звяртаемся да кіраўнікоў дзяржаў-членаў Еўрапейскага Саюза і НАТО. Ды, першае, заклікае не прызнаваць вынікі выбараў, якія адбыліся ў Беларусі 9 жніўня 2020 года, Александра Лукашенку не признавать за легитимного кіраўніка Беларуси. Другое.
2.
Захвочивая потребовать новых
Invites to call for holding new and transparent presidential and parliamentary elections in Belarus that would meet the democratic standards. Holding the use of violence against peaceful protesters. Immediately releasing all the imprisoned members of the opposition and civil society, and ensuring the freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and other political and civil freedoms in Belarus. Proposes to immediately establish a European Union mediation mission for Belarus aimed at helping to resolve the political crisis and regulate the conflict situation in the country. Calls for holding an extraordinary meeting for the European Council to discuss the situation in the Republic of Belarus and consider imposing a EU-wide embargo on electricity produced by the Belarusian nuclear power plant in Astrovets. Long live Belarus, thank you. Colleagues, Emanuelis Zingeris. Friends, I haven't registered for intervention, but I am obliged to announce Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, first of all. Venezuelan acting president address to the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania and the Speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania. As the acting president of Venezuelan Parliament, I would like to express my support to your efforts in assisting Belarus after the illegitimate elections in the country. Your efforts are extremely close to our hearts. This is something that helped us to survive in Nicolas Maduro regime. We are eyewitnesses of the regime that caused the biggest humanitarian crisis after the Syrian crisis, when 5.2 million of Venezuelan citizens had to flee the country. Mrs. Tsikhanovskaya, let me express the full solidarity with you and Belarusian people who are fighting for their rights and freedom. I do believe that your co-citizens will have every opportunity to pursue their mission till the very end. The acting president of the Venezuelan Parliament. And there is a similar address to the Speaker of the Parliament as well as all the members of the Seimas for convening this extraordinary session. Even though the Republic of Venezuela and Cuba are far away, we are all fighting for our common ideals against totalitarian regimes, and we are not going to let these totalitarian regimes to occupy Lithuania or any other country, Belarus or any other country. Kęstutis Masiulis. Colleagues, I have a non-typical statement to make. I have been closely following the developments in Belarus, and the reaction of my colleagues to them. A few days ago, Zbigniew Jedinski, one of our colleagues, who is the leader of one of our political factions, who announced that the position that the militia in Belarus is defending the country's constitution. And he goes on to say that nobody should interfere with another country's issues. Lithuania should not engage in evaluating the activities of another country's police. Zbigniew Jedinski is not here with us. The Speaker of our Parliament mentioned that he should be here with us today. However, I see these colleagues of ours in some coalition with Putin's policy, as a matter of fact, and this is why I would like to ask the ruling coalition representatives. How do you see the coalition with such actors? Thank you. Colleagues, let me thank all the representatives of both opposition, our guests from Belarus, representatives of NGOs. Let's give them an applause. Colleagues, we are closing our extraordinary session now.
Ačiū kolegos, posėdis baigtas. Ir sesija taip.
Thank you, colleagues. The meeting is over.
Taip.